The smell hit Dr. James Carter first. Rotting garbage mixed with something else. Something dying. He was doing his usual rounds on the edge of Settlement 7 when his medical scanner started beeping like crazy. The thing only made that sound when it detected life signs. Weak ones. James kicked aside a broken crate and stopped dead in his tracks. There in the trash, half buried under metal scraps and waste, was the biggest cat-like creature he'd ever seen. Except it wasn't a cat. Not really. The fur was matted and filthy, but even through the grime, James could see spots that shimmered like crystals catching light. A Vraxi. He'd seen pictures in the colony database but never up close. This one looked ancient, and it looked like it was dying. James knelt down slowly. The creature's ribs were showing through its skin. Open wounds covered its body, infected and oozing. Its breathing came in short, painful gasps. Someone hadn't just abandoned this animal. They'd thrown it away like trash and left it to suffer. The Vraxi opened one eye. Just a crack. The eye was amber-colored, bright and clear despite everything else. And when that eye focused on James, he felt something strange in his chest. This wasn't the blank stare of a dumb animal. There was awareness there. Intelligence. Maybe even understanding. James reached for his scanner. His AI assistant immediately started talking in his ear. The voice sounded worried, almost panicked. "Dr. Carter, I must advise against approaching. Vraxi are classified as dangerous predators. This specimen belongs to a crow merchant. Interfering with registered property violates multiple colony regulations." James ignored the warnings. He'd been a medic for 15 years. He knew suffering when he saw it. And he knew his oath didn't have fine print that said some lives mattered less than others. "Run a full scan," he said quietly, keeping his eyes on the Vraxi. The scanner beeped and hummed. Numbers scrolled across the small screen. None of them were good. Severe dehydration. Multiple infected wounds. Malnutrition indicating prolonged neglect. Estimated survival without immediate intervention is less than 5%. James noticed something else. Around the creature's neck was a pressure mark, a deep scar where something had pressed into the skin for a long time. A collar. Recently removed. This wasn't an accident. Someone had taken off that collar and dumped this living being here to die alone. "Check the ownership registry," James said. There was a pause. Then the AI spoke again, sounding even more worried. "Registered owner is Merchant Vex Thorin of the Crow Trading Consortium. Status shows as disposed 3 days ago. Reason listed: advanced age, medical costs deemed not economically justified." James felt anger rising in his throat. He'd seen a lot of cruel things in his time on the frontier. But this casual cruelty, this treating a living creature like a broken tool you just threw away, it made him sick. The Vraxi was still watching him. Those amber eyes hadn't blinked. Hadn't looked away. There was something in that gaze. Hope maybe. Or just the quiet acceptance that came when you'd given up fighting. James pulled a sedative from his medical kit. His hands moved steady and sure, even though his heart was pounding. "Hey there," he said softly, not sure if the creature could understand. "I'm going to help you. This'll put you to sleep for a bit. When you wake up, things will be better. I promise." He injected the sedative into the creature's shoulder. The Vraxi didn't fight. Didn't even flinch. As the medicine took effect, those intelligent eyes started to close. But just before they shut completely, James could have sworn he saw something change in them. A flicker of something that looked almost like relief. Getting the massive creature onto his transport sled was brutal. The thing had to weigh at least 300 pounds, even half-starved as it was. James's back screamed in protest. Sweat poured down his face. His AI kept reciting regulation after regulation that he was breaking. He didn't care about any of it. By the time he got back to his small clinic on the edge of the settlement, the sun was setting. James was exhausted, his clothes were filthy, and his AI had gone from worried to actively alarmed. "Dr. Carter, I am required to inform you that harboring unregistered fauna without owner consent is a Class 3 violation. Merchant Vex Thorin will be automatically notified of his property's location due to tracking protocols embedded in the registry system." James looked at the Vraxi, now lying on his examination table. Even unconscious, even dying, there was a dignity to the creature. A presence. "She's not property," James said out loud. "She's a patient." He got to work. The clinic's lights burned late into the night as James cleaned wounds, administered antibiotics, set up 4 lines for fluids and nutrition. The infections were bad. Really bad. By all rights, this creature should have died days ago. But something in her was still fighting. Still holding on. As dawn broke, James finally stepped back. He'd done everything he could. The Vraxi's breathing was steadier now. The worst of the wounds were cleaned and treated. In the soft morning light, he could finally see her properly. She was old. The scans put her at around 70 years, which was ancient for her species. But underneath all the scars and neglect, James could see hints of what she must have been. Her crystalline spots, now cleaned, seemed to pulse with a faint inner light. Her bone structure spoke of strength and grace. His communicator buzzed. A message from Merchant Vex Thorin appeared on the screen. The words were blunt and threatening. "You have my property. Return it within 24 hours or face legal action. The creature is worthless to me, but the principle matters. Humans do not steal from the crow." James read the message twice. Then he deleted it. He pulled up a chair next to the exam table and sat down. The Vraxi was sleeping peacefully now, maybe for the first time in years. Her ear twitched slightly. Without thinking, James reached out and gently placed his hand on her shoulder, feeling the warmth through her fur. "I don't know what's coming," he said quietly. "But you're safe now. Whatever it takes, you're not going back to that." Outside, the settlement was waking up. News traveled fast in small colonies. By noon, everyone would know that the human doctor had taken in a Vraxi. That he'd stolen from a crow merchant. That he'd broken at least a dozen regulations. James didn't care. He'd spent his whole life helping people. This was no different. The fact that his patient had fur and walked on 4 legs didn't change anything. She was alive. She was aware. She deserved better than being thrown away like garbage. He sat there watching her breathe, steady and strong, and made himself a promise. Whatever came next, whatever threats or consequences followed, he wouldn't back down. Some things were worth fighting for. Some lines you didn't cross no matter what the law said. The Vraxi slept on, unaware that her rescue had just set in motion events that would shake the entire galaxy. Unaware that one human's simple act of compassion was about to change everything. All she knew, in whatever dreams dying creatures have, was that someone had finally seen her. Someone had finally cared. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. 3 days passed before the Vraxi woke up properly. James was in the middle of changing her bandages when it happened. Those amber eyes opened wide and locked onto him with an intensity that made him freeze. For a long moment, neither of them moved. James was suddenly very aware that he was inches away from a predator that could probably kill him with one swipe of her massive paw. His heart hammered in his chest. Every survival instinct he had was screaming at him to back away slowly. But he didn't move. And neither did she. The Vraxi just watched him. Her eyes tracked every tiny movement of his hands as he worked on the infected wound across her side. There was no aggression in that gaze. No fear either. Just careful observation, like she was studying him, trying to figure him out. James took a slow breath and forced himself to relax. "Easy there, girl," he said softly. "I'm just trying to help. Promise I'm not going to hurt you." What happened next made James question everything he thought he knew about animals. The Vraxi's breathing changed. It slowed down, deepened, became almost rhythmic. Then a sound came from deep in her chest. A low rumbling that vibrated through the air. At first, James thought it was a growl. His muscles tensed, ready to jump back. But it wasn't a growl. It was purring. The vibration intensified. James could feel it through his hands where they touched her fur. And then something weird happened. Really weird. His thumb started tingling. The thumb he'd accidentally cut with a scalpel the day before. The cut that had been red and sore all morning. James pulled his hand back and stared. The cut was healing. Right in front of his eyes. The skin was knitting back together, the redness fading. Within seconds there was nothing left but a faint pink line. "What the hell?" James whispered, turning his hand over and over, not believing what he'd just seen. The Vraxi kept purring. Her eyes were half closed now, and if James didn't know better, he'd swear she looked amused. Like she was enjoying his confusion. His hands shook as he grabbed his medical scanner. "Scan that sound. Full spectrum. I want every detail." The scanner whirred and beeped. Data scrolled across the screen. James read it once. Then twice. Then a third time because his brain refused to process what he was seeing. The purring wasn't just sound. It was a complex pattern of vibrations operating at frequencies that directly stimulated cellular regeneration. The sound waves were actually triggering his body's natural healing processes, speeding them up by a factor of 10 or more. This creature was healing him. On purpose. Why isn't this in any database? James demanded, scrolling through his medical files with shaking fingers. This is incredible. This is revolutionary. Why doesn't anyone know about this? His AI responded in its usual calm tone. Available research on Vraxi species focuses primarily on their commercial value as exotic companions and security animals. Medical properties are largely unexplored. Most studies are conducted by owners interested in maintaining their investment, not scientific advancement. James looked at the Vraxi with completely new eyes. Because nobody bothered to actually study you. They just saw something pretty to own. Something to show off. The purring got louder and James felt something else. A warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with physical healing. The stress he'd been carrying for months, the anxiety about money and regulations and all the pressure of running a frontier clinic, it just melted away. For the first time in ages he felt genuinely peaceful. Over the next week, a routine developed. James would come in each morning to check on his patient. She'd watch him work with those intelligent eyes. And she'd purr, filling the small clinic with those incredible healing frequencies. The other patients started noticing. Ryan Mitchell, a construction worker who'd broken his arm in 3 places, was the first to comment. "Doc, I swear this arm feels way better when that big cat's in the room. What's her deal? Is she some kind of medical animal?" James paused. He'd been calling her the Vraxi, or she in his head, but she deserved better than that. "Her name's Azara," he said, surprising himself. The word just came out naturally like it had been waiting there all along. It was an old Earth word he'd read somewhere. It meant helper. The moment he said it, Azara's head lifted. She made a soft chirping sound, almost like a question. Her eyes fixed on him with that unnerving intelligence. "Yeah, Azara," James repeated. "That's you." She chirped again, and this time it sounded almost like agreement. Ryan stared at the exchange, his eyes wide. "Doc, I don't want to sound crazy, but I think she understands you. Like really understands you." James met Azara's gaze. "Yeah," he said slowly. "I think she does too." That night, after closing the clinic, James did something he probably should have done days ago. He started researching Vraxi seriously. Not the basic commercial information but everything he could find. Archaeological records, xenobiology papers, even old expedition reports. What he found made his blood run cold. Most of the official databases treated Vraxi like animals. Smart animals, sure, but still just animals. But buried in archaeological records, hidden in files most people never bothered to read, were images. Ancient carvings from 3 different planets showing Vraxi alongside another species. Tall, elegant beings that had vanished from the galaxy thousands of years ago. In every single image, the Vraxi weren't servants. They weren't pets. They stood as equals. Partners. One partially translated text made James sit back in his chair, his heart pounding. The translation was rough, full of gaps, but the meaning was clear enough. It talked about beings called the Silent Guardians who chose their companions with wisdom. Who could heal with their voices. Who protected those they bonded with. Talked about Vraxi. James looked across the room. Azara was sleeping on the reinforced medical bed he'd set up for her. Her crystalline spots glowed softly in the darkness, pulsing with a rhythm that matched her breathing. Beautiful and peaceful and completely aware. "They didn't just forget about you," James said quietly to her sleeping form. "They buried what you were. On purpose. Because if people knew you were intelligent, knew you could think and feel and choose, they couldn't justify treating you like property." The next morning, everything changed. Merchant Vex Thorin showed up at the clinic. The Crow was huge, easily 7 feet tall with 4 arms and copper-colored skin that gleamed in the morning light. He pushed past the waiting patients like they didn't exist and slammed one massive hand down on James's desk. "Dr. Carter," his translator device turned his clicks and hisses into harsh words. "You have ignored my messages. You have kept my property against my explicit demands. This ends now. Return the Vraxi immediately or I will have you arrested." James stood slowly. He was half the Crow's size but he didn't back down. "She's not your property. She's my patient. And she's not going anywhere. She is a registered animal under Galactic Commerce Code. I have documentation going back 3 generations. The law is very clear." "The law is wrong," James said. "She's intelligent. She's aware. She communicates. She has feelings. You can't own a person and that's what she is." Vex Thorin laughed, a sound like metal scraping on rock. "It's a clever pet. Nothing more. You humans always do this. You see patterns where none exist. You project your emotions onto animals. This is your only warning. Return my property or face consequences." Before James could respond, a sound filled the clinic. Deep and resonant. A vibration that made the windows rattle in their frames. Azara had entered the room. And she wasn't purring anymore. She was growling. The massive Vraxi placed herself directly between James and the Crow merchant. Her lips pulled back, revealing teeth the size of daggers. The crystalline spots along her body blazed with light, so bright it hurt to look at them directly. Vex Thorin stumbled backward, all four arms coming up defensively. "Control your animal," Azara roared. The sound was like nothing James had ever heard. It hit like a physical wave, carrying frequencies that made every loose object in the clinic vibrate. Vex Thorin's translator sparked and died. Patients in the waiting room covered their ears. Glass cracked. But James felt nothing. The sound washed around him, leaving him completely untouched. "Protected. Get out," James said quietly. "And don't come back." The Crow merchant ran. Actually ran, scrambling for the door with all four arms flailing. In the silence that followed, Azara turned to James. Slowly, carefully, she lowered her massive head and pressed her forehead against his chest. The gesture was gentle, deliberate, full of meaning that needed no words. She had chosen him, and she would protect him. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The video went viral within hours. Someone in the waiting room had recorded the whole thing on their communicator. Azara confronting Vex Thorin. That roar that shook the building. The Crow merchant running away like a scared child. By evening, the footage had spread across the entire settlement network. By midnight, it had reached human colonies in 3 different star systems. People couldn't stop watching. Couldn't stop talking about it. James tried to ignore the attention and focus on his patients. But it was hard when every other person who walked through the door wanted to talk about Azara instead of their actual medical problems. Around sunset, Administrator Rebecca Foster showed up at the clinic. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd spent 20 years in the military before taking the civilian job. She didn't waste time with small talk. "Dr. Carter. My office. Now." James followed her to the back room. Azara padded along behind them, staying close to James like a shadow. Rebecca noticed but didn't comment until they were all seated. "So," Rebecca said, pulling up a holographic display. "Want to tell me what exactly is going on with your pet?" "She's not a pet," James said automatically. Rebecca raised one eyebrow. "The Vraxi that just terrorized a Crow merchant with legal property documentation?" "Legal documentation for owning a person," James shot back. "Can you prove that?" James took a breath. Then he started talking. He showed her everything. The brain scans showing complex neural pathways. The cognitive tests proving problem-solving abilities. The healing frequencies that indicated deliberate control over biological processes. The archaeological evidence suggesting Vraxi were once treated as equals by an ancient civilization. Rebecca studied the data on her tablet for a long time. Her expression gave nothing away. Azara lay in the corner, watching the administrator with those amber eyes that missed nothing. Finally, Rebecca spoke. "This is compelling evidence. But it's also a political nightmare. The Crow Trade Consortium moves billions in goods through this sector every year. If you're right, if Vraxi are actually sentient beings, you're accusing an entire species of slavery. That kind of accusation could destabilize trade relationships across multiple systems." "I'm not trying to start a war," James said. "I just want her to have a choice. Let experts examine her. Let them see what I've seen. If I'm wrong, I'll accept the consequences." Rebecca was quiet for a moment, her eyes moving between James and Azara. "And if you're right? If this opens a can of worms that affects thousands of Vraxi across the galaxy? Are you ready for that responsibility?" James looked at Azara. She met his gaze steadily, and he remembered finding her in that trash heap. Dying. Abandoned. Treated like garbage. "Yes," he said simply. "Someone has to speak for those who can't speak for themselves." Rebecca nodded slowly. "All right. I'll arrange for a tribunal. We'll bring in xenobiologists, linguists, legal experts from multiple species. We'll do this properly. But doctor, the moment I file this petition, you become a target. The Crow won't take this quietly. Neither will other species with economic stakes in keeping things as they are." "I understand. I hope you do." Rebecca stood to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. Just be careful." After she left, James sat with Azara in the quiet clinic. She moved closer, resting her massive head on his lap. The purring started again, those healing frequencies washing over him like a warm blanket. "I hope I'm not making things worse," James whispered, running his hand through her fur. Azara's purr deepened, and James felt something. Not just physical healing but emotional comfort. Like she was telling him everything would be okay. The first threat arrived 2 days later. An anonymous message on his communicator. Just 3 words and an ominous promise. Stop now or accidents happen to humans on the frontier. James reported it to colony security, but he wasn't surprised. He'd expected pushback. What he didn't expect was the support that came with it. Dr. Patricia Hayes from the Xenobiology department showed up the next morning with 3 cases of testing equipment. Heard you might need help documenting cognitive abilities? I'm volunteering my time. George Thompson from engineering arrived with reinforced security doors. Free installation. Consider it a gift from someone who thinks you're doing the right thing. Even patients started rallying. Ryan Mitchell organized a petition signed by over 400 colonists demanding fair treatment for Azara. The construction workers' union declared they'd strike if James was arrested. People are paying attention, Doc, Ryan said, gripping James's shoulder. What you're doing matters. Not just for her but for what kind of galaxy we want to build. But the support came with escalation. Someone cut the power to the clinic one night, destroying a week's worth of refrigerated medicine. Graffiti appeared on the walls. Nasty words in multiple languages. Anonymous messages flooded the settlement network calling James everything from a criminal to a fool to worse things he tried not to read. Through all of it, Azara stayed close. At night, she positioned herself between James and the door, always alert, always watchful. During the day, her eyes tracked everyone who entered the clinic with an intensity that made troublemakers think twice. Dr. Hayes ran cognitive tests for a week straight, and every day she grew more amazed. James, she's solving puzzles designed for recognized sentient species. She understands cause and effect. She can identify patterns. Look at this test where I showed her images and asked her to pick which one doesn't belong. She got 20 out of 20 correct. What about language? James asked. Can she communicate? That's the fascinating part. She's trying to communicate. Her vocalizations have complex patterns, grammatical structure even. But our translators can't interpret them. It's like she's speaking a language we don't have the right tools to understand. James had an idea. He contacted Michelle Garcia, a communication specialist who designed interfaces for species with non-standard communication methods. She arrived the next day with a prototype device that could translate frequency patterns into visual concepts. The first test was simple. James displayed 2 images on a screen. One showed food, the other showed water. He pointed at them and looked at Azara. Which one do you want? Azara studied the screen carefully. Then she vocalized, a complex rumble that made the device light up with waveforms and patterns. After a moment, text appeared on the screen. The translation was rough, more concepts than words. Not hungry. Safe here. Grateful. The 3 humans stared at the screen in complete silence. Michelle's voice shook when she finally spoke. My God. She's been trying to talk this whole time. And nobody could hear her. Over the next few days they refined the interface. The translations got clearer. Azara's communication wasn't like human language. It was more emotional, more conceptual. But it was undeniably communication. Real thoughts from a real mind. When Patricia asked about her past, the concepts that came through broke James's heart. Memories of kindness from decades ago. An old Krell female who had treated her with respect, who had tried to understand her. Then that owner's death and being passed from hand to hand like furniture. Years of trying to communicate, only to have her sounds dismissed as animal noises. Being punished when she tried too hard to be heard. One evening, James asked the question that had been haunting him since the day they met. Azara, that day in the trash heap. Did you know I would help you? The device translated her response as a weaving together of multiple concepts. Hope mixed with recognition. The sense of seeing compassion in another being. And a word the translator struggled with before settling on something that meant pack bond or chosen family. Michelle wiped tears from her eyes as she read the translation. She's saying she recognized you as someone who could see her. Really see her. She chose to trust you, even though trust had failed her before. James looked at Azara, this magnificent being who had been invisible to everyone who looked at her. He thought about all the other Vraxi out there. How many were trying to speak? How many had given up on being heard? We're going to make sure everyone sees you now, he promised quietly. All of you. Every single one. The tribunal was scheduled for 3 weeks out. 3 weeks to prepare. 3 weeks for the opposition to organize. 3 weeks for word to spread across the galaxy that someone was challenging centuries of accepted practice. James knew those would be the longest 3 weeks of his life. He knew the crowd wouldn't go quietly. He knew there were powerful forces that wanted Azara silent, wanted things to stay exactly as they were. But every time doubt crept in, he'd look at Azara and remember her lying in that trash heap. Remember those amber eyes looking at him with desperate hope. Remember the moment she'd pressed her forehead to his chest and chosen him as her family. Some things were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Some voices deserved to be heard, even if the whole galaxy tried to silence them. And James Carter, a simple frontier medic, was going to make damn sure Azara's voice echoed across every star system in known space. The tribunal chamber was packed. They'd converted the largest cargo bay in Settlement 7 into a makeshift courtroom, and still there wasn't enough space. People lined the walls, sat in the aisles, crowded around the doorways. Humans, Krall, and a dozen other species all crammed together, waiting to see how this would play out. James sat at a simple metal table with Azara lying beside him. Dr. Patricia Hayes and Michelle Garcia flanked them on either side. Across the room, Merchant Vex Thorin had assembled a legal team that probably cost more than James made in 5 years. 3 Krall lawyers in expensive robes and a Mindril advocate with a reputation for never losing a case. The adjudicators sat on an elevated platform. Administrator Rebecca Foster represented human interests. An elderly Krall named Tech Vorian spoke for the consortium. And a Sessic philosopher called Witness Morn served as the neutral third party. The Sessic were known across the galaxy for their wisdom and fairness. When they spoke, people listened. Rebecca called the session to order. Her voice carried across the crowded room. This tribunal will determine the legal status of the Vraxi known as Azara. The question before us is simple. Is she property, or is she a sentient being deserving of protected rights under Galactic Council law? The lead Krall attorney stood immediately. Her name was Vesa Kryn, and everything about her screamed expensive and dangerous. Honored adjudicators, let us not waste time. Vraxi are classified as fauna under Galactic Commerce Code Section 47. They have been legally traded and owned for over 800 years. My client possesses documentation proving ownership lineage going back 4 generations. Dr. Carter has stolen valuable property. Now he attempts to justify his crime by projecting human emotions onto an animal. The courtroom murmured with voices agreeing and disagreeing in equal measure. James felt his stomach knot up. This was really happening. Patricia Hayes stood up, her tablet in hand. If I may address the court? I've spent 3 weeks conducting extensive cognitive testing on Azara. The results prove beyond doubt that she possesses problem-solving abilities, abstract thinking, self-awareness, and communication capacity that meets every threshold for sentience established by the Galactic Council. She projected the data onto the large screens around the room. Brain scans showing neural complexity. Test results demonstrating learning and memory. Recordings from the communication interface showing actual thoughts, actual language. The evidence was overwhelming. Azara wasn't just smart for an animal. She was genuinely, undeniably sentient. But Vesa Kryn didn't look worried. She smiled slightly and pulled up her own displays. Impressive data, Dr. Hayes. However, I present counter-evidence. These are Vraxian households across Krall space. Well-fed, healthy, content. Many Krall families have bonds with their Vraxi spanning generations. Are we to believe every Vraxi owner in the galaxy is enslaving sentient beings? Or is it more logical that this particular Vraxi has been trained to respond to tests in ways that mimic sentience? She paused, letting her words sink in. Furthermore, if Vraxi are truly sentient, why has no Vraxi ever attempted to communicate their awareness in 800 years? Why have they served willingly in households bonded to owners, bred in captivity? Their apparent acceptance of their status suggests a species that has chosen domestication. Much like ancient Earth dogs chose partnership with humans. The courtroom erupted. Voices shouted from every direction. Some agreed with the lawyer. Others called her arguments disgusting. Rebecca had to bang her gavel 3 times to restore order. James felt the case slipping through his fingers. The argument was clever and it played on people's desire not to feel guilty. It was easier to believe Vraxi were happy animals than to face the possibility of widespread injustice. Then Michelle Garcia stood up. Her hands were shaking, but her voice stayed steady. I'd like to present testimony from Azara herself. The courtroom went dead silent. Michelle activated the communication interface. The device hummed to life, its sensors focused on Azara. Azara, can you tell the tribunal about your life? For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Azara's crystalline spots began to glow brighter. She vocalized, a long complex series of sounds that the interface struggled to translate. Slowly, text began appearing on the screens around the room. But it wasn't just text. The interface converted her frequency patterns into visual concepts, emotional impressions, actual memories. The courtroom watched as Azara's story unfolded on the screens. A memory of an old Kral female from decades ago. The only owner who had tried to understand her sounds, who had treated her with genuine kindness. Then that female's death. The grief. Being passed to the next owner like a piece of furniture in a will. The memories kept coming. New owners who saw her as a status symbol. Making sounds, trying to communicate only to be ignored or punished for being disruptive. The slow realization that no one would ever hear her. The quiet despair of understanding everything around her while everyone treated her like she understood nothing. Then came the memory of the trash heap. Being dumped there. The pain and infection spreading through her body. The acceptance that this was how her life would end. Alone. Unheard. Invisible. And then a human face appearing above her. Kind eyes in a world that had shown her no kindness. A gentle voice promising help. The first real hope she'd felt in years. When the translation ended, there wasn't a sound in the room. James saw tears running down human faces. Even some of the alien observers looked shaken. A few Kral in the audience had turned away, unable to watch anymore. Vesa Kryn recovered quickly, though her voice had lost some of its confidence. A compelling story. But this interface is experimental technology. It could be misinterpreting random vocalizations. Even accepting it as accurate, it only proves this individual has developed unusual abilities through exposure to civilization. It doesn't prove species-wide sentience. Tekvorian, the elderly Kral on the panel, spoke for the first time. His voice was heavy, tired. A valid legal point. Dr. Carter, do you have evidence that other Vraxi share these capabilities? James's heart sank. They'd only tested Azara. They didn't have data on other Vraxi. The case was going to fail on a technicality. Then Patricia stood up again. She pulled out her tablet with a slight smile. Actually, we do. Over the past 3 weeks, we've been contacted by 73 Vraxi owners across 4 different star systems. They've been running tests using our published protocols. Would you like to see the results? She projected data from dozens of sources. Test after test after test, all showing the same thing. Every Vraxi examined demonstrated sentience-level cognition. Every single one. Furthermore, Patricia continued, her voice growing stronger, we've uncovered suppressed documentation. Archaeological reports buried by corporate interests. Research papers that were never published. Even testimony from Kral scientists who questioned the ethics of Vraxi ownership decades ago. It was all hidden to protect a profitable industry. She displayed the documents on the screens. Official reports showing Vraxi cognitive abilities. Internal memos discussing how to keep the information quiet. Communications between consortium executives explicitly acknowledging Vraxi sentience while agreeing to maintain the fiction that they were animals. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Shouting voices in a dozen languages. Tekvorian looked like someone had physically struck him. Vex Thorin was yelling at his lawyers, all 4 arms gesturing wildly. Rebecca banged her gavel over and over, but it took 10 minutes to restore any semblance of order. When the noise finally died down, witness Morn spoke. The Sessex voice was soft, but it carried throughout the chamber. This tribunal recognizes that the evidence presented demonstrates Vraxi possess sentience as defined by Galactic Council standards. However, the legal and social complications are significant. We propose the following. The philosopher paused, choosing words carefully. Azara will be tested directly for her preference. If she chooses to remain with Dr. Carter of her own free will, she will be recognized as a free individual with full legal protections. Other Vraxi across the galaxy will be offered similar testing over the next 6 months. Those who wish to remain with current owners may do so. Those who wish freedom will be granted protected status and assistance in building independent lives. Vesa Kryn shot to her feet. That sets a dangerous precedent that undermines property rights across multiple legal codes. The precedent, witness Morn interrupted gently, is recognizing that ignorance of sentience does not justify continuation of harm once knowledge is gained. This is not an attack on Kral culture. It is an evolution of our understanding. When we learn we have caused harm unknowingly, we have a moral obligation to stop causing that harm. This is the foundation of civilized society. The 3 adjudicators conferred briefly, speaking too quietly for the audience to hear. Then Rebecca stood and announced the decision. This tribunal rules that Vraxi demonstrates sufficient sentience to warrant protected status under Galactic Council law. Existing Vraxi in private ownership will be offered choice testing within 6 months. All trading of Vraxi is immediately suspended pending full Galactic Council review. This ruling is effective immediately. Half the courtroom erupted in cheers. The other half erupted in angry protests. James barely heard any of it. He only had eyes for Azara. The massive Vraxi pressed against his side, purring that healing frequency. Through the interface a simple concept came through. One word that meant everything. Free. Vex Thorin stormed from the courtroom, his legal team struggling to keep up. As he passed James's table, he stopped and hissed something his broken translator couldn't fully convert. But the meaning was clear enough in his tone and body language. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. James watched him go, then looked down at Azara. Her amber eyes met his, full of trust and gratitude and something that looked a lot like love. Worth it, James said quietly. Whatever comes next, it was worth it. The attack came 3 weeks after the tribunal. James woke up to the sound of alarms screaming through Settlement 7. He jumped out of bed and ran to the window. What he saw made his blood run cold. Armed figures were moving through the streets. At least 20 of them, maybe more. Crow mercenaries in tactical gear, carrying weapons that looked military grade. And they were headed straight for his clinic. Azara. James shouted, already grabbing his emergency communicator to call for help. He didn't need to call. Azara was already awake, already moving. Her crystalline spots blazed with light so bright it hurt to look at directly. A growl rumbled from deep in her chest, a sound that shook the walls of the building. She positioned herself between James and the door. Waiting. Ready. The mercenaries didn't bother with subtlety. They cut through the clinic's front entrance with plasma torches, the metal glowing red and then white before it gave way. James backed toward the emergency exit, but Azara didn't move. She held her ground. The first mercenary through the door got the shock of his life. Azara roared, and it was like nothing James had ever heard from her before. The sound carried frequencies that shattered every window in the clinic. The mercenaries stumbled, their weapons sparking and dying as the sonic waves disrupted their electronics. One of them actually fell to his knees, clutching his head. Then Azara moved. James had seen her old and injured. He'd seen her gentle with patience. He'd never seen her like this. Like what she truly was. A guardian. She was impossibly fast. One moment she was standing still, the next she was a blur of fur and crystalline light. Her massive paw struck a mercenary's weapon, sending it flying across the room. Another swipe knocked a Kral off his feet. She was everywhere at once, moving with precision and power that took James's breath away. And she wasn't killing them. James realized that with amazement. Every strike was calculated. Dislocating limbs, not breaking them. Concussions, not crushed skulls. She was fighting to protect, not to kill. But there were too many. Even Azara couldn't hold back 20 armed attackers alone. James saw 3 mercenaries flanking her, raising their weapons. He opened his mouth to shout a warning. Then the back door of the clinic exploded inward. For a terrifying second, James thought they were surrounded. Then 3 more Vraxi burst through the opening, and his fear turned to shock. They were younger than Azara, their movements even faster, their spots glowing like small stars. They spread out with military precision, forming a protective formation around James and Azara. What? How did you? James stammered. Through the communication interface running on emergency power, a message came through from one of the newcomers. The translation was choppy but clear enough. Pack hears. Pack answers. Azara called. We came. The 4 Vraxi fought together like they'd trained for years. Their movements coordinated perfectly. Their defensive frequencies overlapped, creating zones where the mercenaries' weapons simply stopped working. Where their communications jammed. Where subsonic pulses disrupted their balance and made them stumble. The fight was over in less than 5 minutes. 20 heavily armed mercenaries lay on the ground, groaning or unconscious. Not one of them was dead, but none of them were getting up anytime soon either. Colony security forces arrived seconds later, led by Administrator Rebecca Foster herself. She stood in the doorway taking in the scene with wide eyes. 4 Vraxi standing in defensive formation around 1 human. 20 mercenaries defeated without a single casualty on either side. James, Rebecca said slowly. Are you all right? I'm fine. They're fine. The mercenaries are alive. James looked at the 4 Vraxi, still glowing with residual energy. How did you know to come? The youngest Vraxi, barely out of adolescence, approached the interface. Her translation came through haltingly like someone learning a new language. Vraxi hear far. Sound humans cannot. Azara sent signal when danger came. All Vraxi in range heard. Those who could travel came to help Pack. Michelle Garcia arrived minutes later with her full communication equipment. As she set up, the full story emerged. Vraxi could communicate with each other across distances humans had never imagined. They used frequencies so low or so high that human technology hadn't even detected them. When Azara bonded with James, when she'd been freed and finally given a voice, she'd sent out a signal. A call that traveled across space to every Vraxi in the sector. A message of hope. That freedom was possible. That someone had finally heard them. And when she'd called for help, many had answered. Over the next few days, the situation exploded across known space. The footage of the attack went viral. Humans couldn't stop sharing it. For Vraxi defending one human with perfect coordination, using non-lethal force, protecting someone who had protected them first. It challenged every assumption people had about the species. More importantly, it scared everyone who had been treating Vraxi as helpless pets. Vraxi across the galaxy began requesting sentience testing. The results were always the same. Every Vraxi tested demonstrated clear, undeniable sentience. And when given the choice between staying or leaving, nearly 70% chose freedom. The 30% who stayed revealed something important too. They had genuinely bonded with kind owners. Families who had treated them with love and respect, even without understanding their full sentience. Their choice to remain was honored, but now as partners, not property. The Kral consortium fell apart. Moderate Kral, horrified by the mercenary attack and the evidence of centuries of lies, broke away from the hardliners. They formed a new coalition dedicated to making amends. To building real relationships with Vraxi based on respect and choice. The hardliners like Vex Thorin faced criminal charges. Not just for the attack but for knowingly enslaving sentient beings. Ancient Kral texts were finally released to the public, texts their ancestors had written about partnering with Vraxi as equals. The evidence was damning. The Kral had known. Their leadership had deliberately chosen profit over ethics. It had taken centuries but the truth was finally out. 6 months after the attack, James stood in the Vraxi Integration Center. The facility sprawled across several acres on the edge of Settlement 7. Places for freed Vraxi to learn about their heritage. Training centers where they could develop skills. Medical wings where their healing abilities were finally being studied and utilized properly. Azara walked beside him, her crystalline spots brilliant with health. She'd become an ambassador, teaching humans and other species about her people. Helping newly freed Vraxi adjust to independence. Facilitating bonds between Vraxi and other species who wanted genuine partnerships. The center was full today. Young Vraxi learning their history from elderly Vraxi who remembered fragments of the old ways. Vraxi training as medical assistants, their purring frequencies being used to help patients across a dozen species. Vraxi simply exploring what it meant to have choices for the first time in their lives. Dr. Patricia Hayes found James in the observation area. We just got the final decision from the Galactic Council. Full sentient status for Vraxi, retroactive legal protections, and mandatory reparations from any species or corporation that profited from their exploitation. The moderate Kral are actually leading the reparations effort. They want to rebuild the relationship properly. And Vex Thorin? James asked. Life sentence in a rehabilitation facility. 20 other Kral leadership are facing similar charges. Patricia shook her head. The consortium is bankrupt. Turns out their entire economy was built on Vraxi trade. When that collapsed, everything else went with it. James felt no sympathy. They'd built wealth on suffering. They deserved what they got. A young human woman approached nervously. Her name was Katie, a botanist who worked on the settlement. One of the Vraxi who'd helped defend the clinic walked beside her. Dr. Carter? I wanted to thank you. This is Starfire. That's not her real name, but it's what the interface translated. She chose to bond with me and I just wanted you to know what an honor that is. Starfire vocalized and the translation came through. She sees. She listens. She respects. Pack bond chosen freely. James watched them leave together, Katie's hand resting gently on the Vraxi's shoulder. He'd seen dozens of these genuine partnerships forming. Humans and Vraxi choosing each other, building relationships based on mutual respect. It was beautiful. Michelle joined them, her tablet full of translation data as always. You changed the galaxy, James. Do you realize that? The Galactic Council is reviewing 43 other species classifications right now, checking whether they might be sentient beings that were misclassified. You opened the door to questioning everything we thought we knew. I just helped one patient, James protested. You saw someone everyone else looked through, Patricia corrected. That made all the difference. You refused to look away. That evening, James sat in his clinic with Azara beside him. Through the window, they could see other Vraxi moving freely through the settlement. Some walked alone, exploring their independence. Others traveled with chosen companions. all of them finally visible after centuries of being rendered invisible. His communicator buzzed. A message from the Galactic Council. They were offering him a position heading a new initiative. The Sentience Recognition Project. Dedicated to ensuring no species would ever suffer what the Vraxi had suffered. James looked at Azara. What do you think? Worth taking on? Her response came through the interface as a complex weave of concepts. Duty to pack. Healing beyond one life. Ripples spreading across still water. Growth from small beginnings. I'll take that as a yes, James smiled. He accepted the position. Over the following year, the project identified 3 more species that had been misclassified. 2 aquatic species that communicated through bioluminescent patterns. A hive-minded collective that used chemical signals. Each time it was the same story. Beings who had been trying to communicate. Nobody had bothered to listen. James traveled across the sector with Azara, the human medic and the Vraxi guardian becoming living symbols of what was possible when compassion crossed species lines. But Settlement 7 remained home. Always home. 2 years after finding Azara in that trash heap, James stood at a ceremony recognizing Vraxi as a sovereign people. Elder Vraxi had formed a council. Azara sat among them, chosen not just for her role in the revolution, but for her wisdom. Tekvorian, the elderly Krau from the tribunal, approached James slowly. Dr. Carter. I must apologize. Not just for my people's crimes but for my own blindness. I owned 3 Vraxi in my life. I thought I treated them well. But I never asked if they wanted to be there. I never truly listened. One of his former Vraxi stood beside him now. An elderly female named Moon Whisper who had chosen to stay with Tech after being offered freedom. Her message through the interface was clear. He learned. Growth matters. Forgiveness given. Tech's eyes glistened with tears. She forgave me. I don't know if I deserve it. But we're learning to be real partners now. It's harder than ownership. But it's so much better. James shook his hand. All 4 of them. That's all any of us can do. Learn. Grow. Be better than we were. The ceremony began. A young Vraxi named Dawnkeeper, one of the first generation born free, spoke through the interface. Her words were translated for the assembled galaxy. We are the silent guardians no more. We have voices. We will use them. We forgive those who learn. We stand with those who see. We remember those who suffered in silence. And we thank the human who looked at one dying Vraxi and saw not property but a person. Not an animal but a friend. The crowd erupted in applause and vocalizations from dozens of species. That night, James sat on the roof of his clinic with Azara. Her massive head rested on his lap, purring that healing frequency that had become as familiar as his own heartbeat. You know what's funny? James said quietly. I didn't do anything special. I just saw someone suffering and helped. That's what any decent person should do. Azara's response came through the interface clipped to his belt. Rare thing. Precious thing. Changed everything. Changed galaxy. We changed it together, James corrected. Yes, together. Always together. This is what pack means. Below them, Settlement 7 was alive with activity. Vraxi and humans working together. Living together. Other species joining in. The whole beautiful, complicated mess of different cultures trying to figure out coexistence. It wasn't perfect. There were still tensions. Still prejudices. Still people who clung to the old ways. But it was better. And tomorrow it would be better still. Ryan Mitchell appeared on the roof with beers. Thought you might want company, document? He set down a bowl of protein supplement for Azara. They sat together watching the stars. 3 beings from different worlds, bound by friendship and the simple revolutionary act of recognizing each other's worth. My daughter asked me something today, Ryan said suddenly. She wanted to know what I wanted to be when I grew up. She's 5, doesn't understand that's not how it works. But it made me think. What kind of person do I want to be? And? James asked. The kind who sees someone suffering and helps. Even when it's hard. Even when it's dangerous. Even when everyone says it's stupid. Ryan raised his beer. To doing the right thing even when it costs everything. James clinked his bottle against Ryan's. To doing the right thing. Azara's purr deepened. Through the interface came a concept the translator rendered as, to pack. To sing. To choosing compassion over comfort. They drank under alien stars. 3 different beings bound by the simple choice to care. To see. To refuse to look away. And somewhere across the galaxy, other beings were making the same choice. Learning to see what they'd looked through before. Learning to listen to voices they'd ignored. One act of compassion at a time. One refusal to look away. One person deciding that all beings mattered. That's how you change a galaxy. Not with grand gestures or dramatic speeches, but with one human finding one abandoned Vraxi and deciding she deserved better. Everything else followed from that single choice. And the ripples were still spreading.